unfollowing all the people who don't make me feel good. How many of us follow people that put us in a funk? You either feel like you're in competition with it, you don't feel good enough, you're comparing.
What are the coaching and the guidance principles that you guys use at Youthwell, people through some of these practical challenges?
I would say both with the individuals that we work with, but also even as a community when we think about this, it's really focusing more on early intervention and prevention.
Let's get rolling. Episode 86, Stay Classy podcast. We're excited to have Rachael on the podcast today. Rachael is the CEO of Youthwell, which we're going to get into in a bit what Youthwell is and about. But before that, I just wanted to thank you, Rachael, so much for coming on the show. Tell us briefly a little bit about the sort of the need to know basis of you, like what there's to know about you and your involvement at Youthwell.
So thank you for having me. I guess I would start with saying I am a mom. I have 3 daughters, twin girls that are 25 years old, and my youngest is 22, who just graduated from college. And the reason I share being a mom is that they're probably a big part of everything I've done in my career, including starting Youthwell 9 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys are based up in Santa Barbara, right?
Correct. We serve Santa Barbara County.
Okay. And we haven't really specified yet. So what exactly does Youthwell do? I know that you guys are all about mental health resources, education, outreach in the community. But just sort of summarize like some of the main, because I did some research ahead of time, but like the sort of the major prongs of the organization, how you guys uniquely engage with the community when it comes to mental health.
So I launched Youthwell 9 years ago, and the way we came about was I actually was really trying to bring together our community. I had a business here for 15 years that was all around resourcing for families here and beyond the county. And one of our daughters started struggling with her mental health when she was in 9th grade, and we could not get services around her. And because of that, she had to go from struggling mildly to being in crisis before we could get the services she needed. And that just should never happen. So when we got to the point where she had the services and support she needed and had gone off to college, I turned my attention to how do we do better in our community. I grew up in Santa Barbara. I love our county. And I also have a clinical background. So all of this is very important to me. We started originally by convening about 50 organizations that included medical community, law enforcement, nonprofits doing any work around this, as well as our school districts, with the idea of just can we have a conversation and see how we do better by families? How do we serve families better? How do we listen more? And how do we better understand the gaps and barriers for families? And what came of that was realizing there was a need to have more conversations and to work more in alignment. And as a result of that, Youthwell became a nonprofit. And then through the collaboration, we started adding more and more programming that serves the county and fills the gaps with a lot of the work that's already being done.
Absolutely. So, and I want to get into that in a second, but first of all, there's obviously tons of great nonprofits out there, like doing great work in the arena of mental health. We've interviewed a couple of people who work in that arena on this podcast, actually, including Cindy Coleman, the founding of Knowing You Matter. Shout out to her. She's a great person, and we really support her on this podcast. But what is it about Youthwell's approach to mental health and to the issue as it relates to the community that sort of really you think kind of sets you guys apart from like other people that are trying to do this?
So you mentioned Cindy, and Cindy and I have spoken, and I think one area that we are so in alignment is personal passion and lived experience. So I think we bring the parent hat to the conversation. In fact, I bring that in everything that I do. There are a lot of incredible organizations doing work around mental health. I think the challenges that I've seen in our community is that what has been typical for nonprofits has been to serve the underserved and at-risk youth. And when it comes to mental health for young people, they're all at risk. So there's stigma around making the assumptions that only those that are underserved are going to be at risk of mental health challenges. So a lot of young people are left out. So when you have organizations that serve a specific population and you have other kids struggling, then there's nowhere for those kids to go. And many people are aware nowadays that insurance is covering less and less and less therapists are taking insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have more families who may have the resources to either pay or have insurance to pay, but they still have no access to services. So
Yeah.
I would say where we're really different is that one, we are not trying to be a direct service organization. What we are really trying to do is work to create community impact and change systems so that they serve more people. And so a lot of that is around bringing people together, having difficult conversations, being more transparent, working with funders in our community to work more together so that we can actually see change happen.
Absolutely. I love that. And one thing you mentioned was the sort of the inequity in terms of access to mental health care, like with, you talked about more and more therapists and mental health counselors not taking, insurance. And so, people paying out of pocket and how that creates disparities in terms of who has access to mental health. I mean, that seems like a huge societal issue that I honestly don't really think I hear a whole lot about, like in terms of like you have somebody maybe who's experiencing a mental health crisis, maybe even like suicidal, and they literally can't afford to, to hire a therapist, to hire someone to talk to. So that seems like a huge issue off the bat. But let's take a step back for a moment and just talk about this issue from a broader lens. I mean, the phrase mental health gets bandied around a lot in media and conversation, but let's be specific. Like, what are the serious ramifications of mental health for communities, for the country as a whole? Like, kind of where are we at with this problem? Like, kind of give us some context, maybe some background info on just like the seriousness of this and why this is more than just kind of a phrase that we throw around.
It's interesting, after the pandemic, I would hear a lot of comments that everything was because of the pandemic. But the reality is we have had these challenges long before the pandemic. Our Surgeon General, prior to the pandemic, wrote this book all around loneliness as an epidemic in the U.S. And with social media, with devices, there's so many things that young people are navigating nowadays that many of us didn't have to growing up. And a lot of these things have really positive sides to them too. Social media, having a cell phone, access to information. But for a young person, the amount of information that's coming at them all the time before they might actually be ready for it is overwhelming. And then when you have social justice issues and political issues and climate issues and all of these things coming at youth, and then they're being told by the other generations, you all need to fix this. It puts a lot of stress on these younger generations. So there's a couple pieces to that. There's the feeling responsible for everything. There's a lot more pressure these days for kids to get into college, so they're feeling that pressure. And then on top of it, because of devices and as a result of the pandemic, there's been a lot more social isolation. So kids are not as comfortable. A lot of them are not as comfortable in group situations. They are more passive. It's much harder for them to make eye contact, interact. And so it's just coming from a place of teaching more just everyday social skills too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And creating connection for kids.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned a lot of great information there, but we talked about the pandemic. We talked about sort of the isolation people are feeling, also like the pressure people are feeling. Something interesting you mentioned is like just like kind of the overwhelming flood of information that young adults are exposed to now, or even, teenagers, like, and that's really interesting. Cause like often I get the sense that, just from like talking to other people my age, people younger, people in their late teens, early 20s, that there's just like kind of this overwhelming sense of like helplessness and sort of kind of dread, like this like pending doom when you think about like social issues, like global issues, because we're exposed to more information than ever before. Like whereas before, like in a past time, like these issues were still there, obviously, but we weren't really exposed to them directly in the same way, or I guess not directly, but indirectly in the same way that we are now, which is both a good and a bad thing, right? Because it's good to be informed. It's good to like kind of stay, keep tabs on what's going on in the world and not live in your own bubble. But on the other hand, like the fact that you can't do a lot about all that, like can just overwhelm a person. So, I mean, let's talk like practically, like, how do you guys and your counselors like sort of talk people through who are experiencing these sort of more existential issues? Like what's like a practical way to kind of walk someone through that and get them to like a better place where that, they feel more in control of their life and of what's going on around them? Like, how do we like push back against that trend?
Enjoying this episode? Subscribe for more content on finding your own path to success. Every subscriber makes a huge difference to the pod, and we're grateful for everyone. And don't forget to throw us a classy like and comment too to let YouTube know that you're a fan of our stuff. Now back to your regularly scheduled podcasting.
Steve, I think that's one of the big pieces. It's giving people tools so that they feel empowered. And when it comes to some of these pressures with seeing so much information, it's not just our youth, right? It's adults are feeling it too. So I would say one of those is getting off, having more concrete times that you let yourself go in and watch social media, or look at social media, watch the news, et cetera. People can get so consumed by this and they don't even realize how much it's eating away at their time and the space it's putting them in. I remember years ago, one of my daughters, and I thought it was so great, she said, I just started unfollowing all the people who don't make me feel good.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, that's so simple. And yet how many of us follow people that put us in a funk, right? Like you either feel like you're in competition with it, you don't feel good enough, you're comparing, or it's just negative information constantly coming at you. So one is looking at all the different ways you get your communication and information and figuring out how you set parameters around that.
Yeah, drawing some boundaries. On this, like kind of, and I know we're jumping all over the place, but I'm just trying to follow like the flow here. So like we're kind of talking about like practical ways, like practical things that we can do to improve my mental health, your mental health, like everyone's mental health, right? Like, and one of those ways we just talked about is drawing boundaries around the information that comes into you. Obviously we're not talking about sticking our heads in the sand, ignoring everything, but just in terms of, being conscientious of the fact that, what comes out of you is what goes into you, right? And so you can't like pour from an empty cup. I think that's like a biblical proverb even, like, this idea that you can't like really help other people. You can't really give the best of yourself to society, to the people in your life if you're constantly being overwhelmed by negativity. So on that trend or on that conversation wavelength of just practical things that we can do, like what are some other things that you feel like Youthwell does especially well in terms of like coaching and guidance and just like sort of the approach to people's mental health? Because sorry, quick sidebar here, but like the statistics about mental health like in the United States are staggering, and we've gone through that on multiple podcasts before, so I'm not just gonna list all that off again, but basically like where we're at is like all-time, pretty much like at least 50 or if not like all-time lows in terms of like mental health since like the end of World War II, especially among young adults. I believe I can't say this as a matter of fact because I have to double check, but I believe suicide rates are at an all-time high in the United States, or at least as high as they've been since the end of World War II. Once again, so that's like 70 years or so. And it's all, not all, but a lot of the key metrics are trending the wrong way. So bringing it back, like what are the coaching and the guidance principles that you guys use at Youthwell to walk people through some of these practical challenges that they're facing on a daily basis?
I would say both with the individuals that we work with, but also even as a community, when we think about this, it's really focusing more on early intervention and prevention.
Okay.
Right. Often we get caught up in waiting till people are in crisis. And then again, that's something that's sensationalized, whether we hear of a suicide, a shooting, all of a sudden it's, oh, we need to do so much now around this.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of hype and then it dies down. And when we talk to youth, one of their biggest frustrations is they've lost their trust in adults to show up for them. We talk at them, but we don't model for them.
Okay.
So we have a youth advisory board, and this year we have 50 students serving on it from around the county. And a lot of it is around giving them a voice, but also educating them and giving them the support to understand this better. And we talk a lot about how important it is to listen when you want to advocate as much as it is to talk. So when we work with them and we start hearing from them what it is that they're seeing, and we talk about too, like look at all the things that are working versus not working, because we want to identify those things too. Our biggest frustrations when we did interviewing this year or the requests were, please educate our parents and teachers out of everything. Like hands down, over and over, we're hearing that.
Yeah.
Young people are so much more open-minded and aware of these things, but they need the adults in their lives to support it. Or they'll talk about things like, there was a suicide on our campus. Everybody gets, lack of a better word, excited and is all in. And we have these crisis centers and everybody cares.
Yeah, there's enthusiasm.
There's enthusiasm, exactly. It's there for 2 weeks and then they're gone.
Yeah.
But then these adults say, oh, you should trust us, but then they don't do anything. So when we talk to young people, and when we do trainings with adults in the community, we talk a lot about what it looks like to show up for young people. What does it look like to show up as a parent? What does it look like to show up in the classroom as a teacher? And often it's the small things that we're doing every day, because if we're really going to focus on prevention and early intervention, it's looking at the fact that we all have mental wellness to handle and to manage every day. So what do those things look like? If I'm racing from class to class during the day, and I have a teacher who spends the first 5 minutes going, okay, let's just practice taking a few deep breaths, getting into a calm space again so that we're ready to go into this next lecture, right? And that's modeling, like, I care about this. It's not standing at the front of the class saying, hey, I care about mental health. If you ever need to talk to someone, come here. It's doing these little tweaks in the class and integrating it into everything you do.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with how we practice our self-care every day. It's not, it's the same idea, when someone wants to lose weight and it's like all about going on a big diet and then you break it. And so you don't feel successful and you cut down on yourself. We want to talk to people more about how do you do incremental things every day.
Yeah.
So you don't have time to do a 5-mile walk, but what does it look like just to take a walk around the block, just to get some fresh air, just to clear your head?
Yeah.
What are the things that you can do that nobody else is going to know, that's going to calm you when you're feeling anxiety?
Yeah.
So make kids more aware of the fact that mental wellness is something we all do.
Yeah.
It's not about mental health and mental illness and having to get to a certain point before you start taking care of it.
Yeah. And I have a question that's related to the sort of generational thing that you touched on and the sort of the first part of your answer there. I just want to give a big shout out, by the way, to my producer, Rob, today for handling a puppy, my puppy, actually, 11-week-old, while at the same time filming and recording this podcast. So big shout out to Rob. Thank you so much for doing that. You're the best, man. We love you. Real quick, though, I was thinking about, and I've asked other people this question before, but I want to get your answer. So it seems like there is more conversation around the topic of mental health, maybe not always guided the right way, but there's more conversation around the topic of mental health in our society than there has been in past decades. And what I mean by that is, for instance, people from the World War II generation, and granted, there's not a whole lot of them left, but like my grandfathers both served in World War II, and my parents both told me the same thing, which is that, and I've heard it from other people who had parents from that generation too, which is that their parents, their fathers never talked about the war, never talked about their experiences in the war. Like people from that generation just were generally, not always, but generally pretty quiet about mental anguish and struggles that they faced. It was sort of a solitary thing. Now, part of that I think I would hypothesize has to do with the idea of masculinity and sort of like keeping things to yourself and being like a strong man. But at the same time, like it seems like there's a generational difference in how the topic of mental health is handled from then to now. It seems like we're more open about it generally, which I would treat as a good, which I would venture to say is a good thing. But at the same time, even though we're more open about it, the problem by all metrics that we just talked about seems to be getting worse. Like suicide rates seem to be getting worse. Like overall depression rates, anxiety rates, mental health disorders seem to be getting worse. I mean, we just look at in San Diego here. I mean, there's also obviously a high drug problem correlated with this, but it seems like we have more mentally ill people on the streets than ever before. At least observably, it seems that way. So let's try to like reconcile that. What's the issue with the fact that we seem to have more openness about the topic than ever before, but the issue seems to be getting worse? What would you say how would you sort of like reconcile those two seeming truths?
So It's interesting. I started Youthwell 9 years ago, and even 9 years ago, when I would try to talk to parents about their youth and how they were struggling, you had families that were in complete denial, or my kid has a perfectly good life. They don't have a right to feel this way. They
Yeah.
shouldn't be depressed, right? And wanting to think that things like depression and anxiety have to be correlated or matched up with something bad happening.
Yeah.
And we know now that's not true. So flip side of that, though, is this generation has much more pressure on them than previous generations.
Okay.
I'm always fascinated when I look and work with young people. They are doing so much more than I remember doing at their age, but they're more programmed.
Okay.
So they know how to perform, but they don't necessarily know as much how to think for themselves and do things for themselves. So often when kids are leaving for college, there's a lot of youth that may have held everything together through high school, but they get to college and they just crash. And part of it is I have been told and said for the last 6 years, my entire goal in life is to get to college, right? Like I have done my volunteer hours, I've gotten straight A's, I've done this, I've done that. And now I'm in college, and now what?
Yeah. What comes next?
Now what?
Yeah.
Either one, I've arrived and now I feel completely discombobulated, or two, I always had someone setting up the structure for me, and now there's no one setting up the structure. And so I think that's more challenging for kids these days. I also think that it's not that we didn't have shootings in the past, but we didn't grow up hearing about all of those things. So I'll talk to kids who will share that they spend part of their time in the classroom figuring out their escape routes if they were to have a shooter in the class.
Yeah.
That is not a thought that ever went through my mind when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And so things that kids are navigating now are they're huge because, again, they have all of this information coming at them so hard and fast.
Hey there, Classy viewers. Thanks for listening to our podcast. We're dedicated to providing you with quality content that inspires and brightens your day. But keeping it classy can be expensive. If you enjoy our content, we're asking for your support for the podcast using the donation link in the description below. Donations mean the world to us, and even as little as $5 can make a huge difference in helping us make this podcast a reality. Plus, donors are added to our shortlist to be the first to receive exclusive offers on merch, extra content, and even chances to appear on the pod. Anything you can give would truly be appreciated. Now get back to enjoying the rest of the podcast, and as always, stay classy.
Yeah. I know this is a whole other topic, but you bring in the subject of shootings, which I feel like we'd be remiss to ignore because that the rationale or the reasoning behind that goes into shootings has something to do in a lot of cases with the issue we're talking about today, mental health. So not always, like people act according to different motives. I believe, and I'm really a believer in the fact that I think that we have a real issue with guns in this country. But that being said, at the same time, there's no question that a lot of these shooters, that there's issues of mental illness that lie behind that, there's people who, again, act from all sorts of different motives, but that mental illness and mental health is a part of the conversation around school shootings. So it all kind of ties together, and you're right, that dynamic, reinforces like fear, anxiety, stress levels among students. So it's all kind of connected. And what I would say is, I'm going to say something that I've said on our podcast about this before, which is that it seems to me from talking to people my age, people younger than me, like people who are still in school, that there's like a deep sense of, yes, there's anxiety, there's stress levels that we talked about, where there's kind of a deep sense of sort of like nihilism and sort of, we talked about the existential dread as well, but just sort of, again, going back to, just like with people who commit school shootings, like there's kind of a sense of just like nihilism of like these people don't really believe in anything. They're kind of just they have no moral compass. They're just completely out of any kind of like moral foundation or boundary. So it seems like these issues are all kind of tied together, and it's kind of a big mess, and it's sort of like, where do we go from here? But what I want to ask you, just to kind of bring it all back, is for students who are feeling these pressures, who are feeling like, just all-time record high levels of anxiety, stress, and especially you talked about when they go to college, and it's like they basically start from ground zero because all that structure is gone that they had before. what can be done realistically by organizations like yours to, well, A, like, obviously smooth that transition into adulthood, but B, kind of address some of those more underlying issues that we talked about?
So I think as adults in their lives, we need to do a lot more listening. One of the things that we do a lot of mental health education. And when we're working with adults, we talk a lot about what it means to be a trusted adult for a youth. When we talk to youth, we talk about how important it is that they identify 5 trusted adults in their lives. So you talked about not being able to pour from an empty cup. It's the same idea with putting your mask on first.
Yeah.
A lot of, typically when we're growing up, we feel responsibility for our friends. We feel like we're going to be narking on them, right? If we tell someone. And so young people are carrying a lot. They're very aware of what's going on with their peers. And so they're holding all of this, right? There's kids who are seeing mental health challenges in their peers. The parents don't know. The kids feel responsible. They're trying to fix it. And so one of the things that we teach a lot is how important it is, 1, to take care of yourself. 2, to know that in order to take care of somebody else, one of your peers, somebody you care about, that you need to ask for help. You need to find an adult who's going to support you. It is not your responsibility as a 17-year-old to figure things out for your friends, right? That's a scary concept and hard to trust. And then figuring out who on their campuses that they can go to, their coaches, et cetera, is a big piece of it. And then for the adults, how do they show up for those students and how do they make it clear? The parents are another one, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
As parents, how do you open up the conversations if you don't agree with a lot of the things that are out there right now? Like there's a lot of young people, and again, this isn't new, that there's LGBTQ, kids struggling with LGBTQ, not even challenges. They're managing their identity. They're coming to terms with all of these things, and yet they don't feel like they have anyone to talk to, right? And so with so much of it, it's figuring out how we connect these kids into things. One of the things I would say that we're unique in is thinking outside the box. Okay. So I am a big believer that not every young person needs therapy. Sometimes they just need to be connected into something meaningful to them. So many are just feeling disconnected. As an example, we know volunteering benefits our mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
For young people who are trying to get into college, when they are trying to get 200 hours and checking off a box, it's a stress. It's not benefiting their mental health.
Yeah.
So when I work with young people, I really talk to them about, you want to find something that matters to you and go after that. Don't think about it as getting into college. Don't think about, I have to go do 20 different volunteer opportunities in order to find something that excites you, that makes you want to go in every day.
Yeah. And I know I kind of stumbled over myself and rambled earlier, but that kind of ties into what I was trying to say about, like kind of the lack of like foundational value and purpose that, we're seeing with a lot of like young people today. And again, like not to overgeneralize, like there's still like exceptions, lots of exceptions, but it generally seems like what you're saying is reflected in the mental health trends that we're seeing, which is that when you give people purpose, whether it's volunteer opportunities or some kind of meaningful work or just some general purpose that's bigger than just themselves and their problems, right? That creates positive outcomes. It generally seems like we're kind of struggling with that, right? Like it seems like we're seeing like a lot of people who, especially Gen Xers, Gen Zers, millennials, like people who are struggling to find like a purpose that's bigger than themselves. And like, obviously that problem doesn't get solved overnight. But what I find interesting about you guys is that you guys are one of the big like pillars of your organization that you highlight, it's even on the front page of your website, is this idea of community and working with community partners, with law enforcement, with educational partners, with different organizations throughout the community. So just and I know you've kind of been talking about that the entire time in certain ways, but just kind of emphasize why the importance of community and doing things like together and giving people that like communal sense of purpose is so important. And one more thing I'll say, sorry, I do want to let you answer, but one more thing I'll say on that is, I think that's also very cultural, right? Like that's something to acknowledge, right? Is that, we live in a very individualistic society in America versus, more societies that are more communally oriented, more collectively oriented in other parts of the world. So, that is, I think, worth acknowledging. But talk about the importance of the community as a principal pillar for your organization and giving people that sense of purpose.
So there's a couple of things, when it comes to working as a community, and that is that so many organizations these days have waiting lists. And even, I kind of come at everything that everybody has best intentions, right? Yeah. The schools have best intentions, organizations have best intentions. But when we get busy, we start to do everything kind of just quick checklist items, right? Yeah. And I had someone, I had an ER nurse say to me one time when I was talking to our hospital, what can we do differently in the ER that we aren't already doing? And I said, I can't speak specifically for you because I haven't seen you in action. Yeah. My guess would be that if you treat every family who comes through there after a suicide attempt as if it's their first time, because for you as the ER nurse, you've seen this 100 times. It's like you're just going through the motions. Not that you don't care, but you've seen it. You're somewhat desensitized.
Well, yeah, you're just human. You get numb to it.
Yeah. Family coming in, exactly. But that family coming in, they are scared. They are overwhelmed. There is shame. They need to feel nurtured and cared for and heard. And so I think sometimes the same things can happen with school counselors. They've got most of our school counselors were not trained to be clinical counselors. Yeah. They're trained to be academic counselors. Yeah. And now the majority of what they see in their offices is mental health challenges. And they're saying, we're doing triage in here and we weren't trained to do this. And so again, it's not that people don't care, but a lot of families I speak to don't feel seen anymore. So they come in and they just feel like, oh, depression, you go over here. Anxiety, you go over here, versus let me talk to you as an individual, you as a family. Let's look at what you specifically need and what's going on. And so a lot of bringing community together is to talk about this. Like, are we really listening anymore? Are we doing what's best for the families that we serve? And when we think about the services that we provide, is this really meeting the needs? So colleges, there's a lot being done at colleges, which is great. But they'll say, and I remember parent orientation for my own daughters, we have this whole mental health center, we have counseling, Like, this is great. Well, then you come to find out there's waiting lists there too, or they'll see you 4 times and then they're going to send you back into the community. So the whole idea of integrating community in schools is that no one person is going to do it all, right? So very often, if you are getting any services in the school, whether it's high school, elementary school, college, at some point you are probably going to need community resources. So how are we doing more integration and building a village around families so that when they need help and ask for help, they are getting it in all aspects, and it's not a fix the child. Because I think that's another detriment, is when we look at people as having to be fixed versus like, you know what? We need to give you tools. And as a family, we need to give the whole family tools, because something's not working here. It's not a matter of people doing it wrong. It's just we can do better. Yeah. So how do we do that together?
It seems like kind of a little bit about what's different than you guys from what I'm hearing is that, like, you acknowledge that a lot of times our communal efforts are very disjointed when it comes from the perspective of a single individual, like their healthcare, their education. It needs to be kind of a holistic, I hate to use this term, but this holistic package of services, that's presented to someone that someone experiences, as opposed to, they kind of get a different level of service here and a completely different, level of service here. And it's all over the place. You guys are trying to like kind of bring it together, and treat these people as human beings, like who are hopefully undergoing, what should be a more cohesive and singular experience. So, one thing I wanted to ask you, and I could go on all day about this topic because I think it's the most important topic that we're facing as a generation right now. But so you mentioned college, and you talked about the mental health experience or struggles that people face in college. And that kind of hit near and dear to me because, as I've shared on the show before multiple times, one of my best friends, unfortunately, like, I lost to suicide in college. I think it was my third year, junior year of college, who was, we went to different schools, but he was my year. And that's it. Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. But like, that was one of the things that like pushed me to try to bring this up on the podcast as much as possible. And it's why I kind of, beat this topic over the head, as it were, because I think it needs to be. And it's why we like to work with organizations like Knowing You Matter, and your organization as well. So, but all that to say is, you made me think like about sort of the personal side to this. And I know that, It's difficult to summarize, the personal side of it for you, in the time allocation that we have. But I will just ask, like, sort of explain to viewers, to listeners. You founded this organization 9 years ago, but talk about sort of the personal story that went in behind that, the personal motivations, and sort of just like who you are and your connection to this issue, as much as you're willing to share.
So I think what was profound for me was that when my daughter started struggling in ninth grade, I knew how to ask for help. The work I had been doing, I was very resourced into the community. I worked with a lot of our organizations already. As I said before, I have a clinical background. I grew up in this community. Like, I had everything going for me that I could possibly want in order to be able to get the support we needed. I knew how to ask for it. I knew who to turn to. I'm okay with advocating for my kids. With all of that, all those tools, I could not get support for her. And I was shocked. We had insurance. I mean, it was just unbelievable to me that we had the sort of the best case scenario and we couldn't access it. So after we went through all of that and realized how common this was and that it was only increasing, that's what really was the turnaround for me. And part of it was when what was required finally for us is that we had to, after 2.5 years, send our daughter to a wilderness program and then on to a therapeutic boarding school. And anyone paying attention to the news knows how many things are going on with that. I mean, a lot of these programs are not ideal. And honestly, it's the last place you want to send your child. For us, it was a year that we missed out on our daughter's life. It was incredibly impactful for her sisters. And then on top of it, you add in the expense. It is incredibly expensive and it's unattainable for most people to be able to do, right? I mean, people are leveraging themselves in order to meet some of the mental health needs for their families. And so the difference, though, that I saw, and I would have done anything not to send my daughter, but we were at a point when she went that I truly felt like it was life or death.
Yeah.
And I wasn't willing to risk it anymore. And so for us sending her, and what we said to her was, we're not sending you away because you're a bad child. We are sending you somewhere safe. And the 5 of us are going to do the work together. So it was very much the whole time the message that we are in this together. We have to figure out a different way. Something is not working here. We were fortunate in the fact that I can't stress how much work and how hard it was and how the emotional roller coaster. So I don't want to make it seem like it was just like tie it up in a bow and it was perfect. I will say it was probably more like 4 years overall of a hellacious learning experience. But because we went all in as a family, we are so much better for it. So both of my, all 3, I think I mentioned, of my girls now are all at college. And I look at where we are now and how much we've grown. And the big change for me when my daughter came back that motivated all this is, from that point on, it wasn't that she was cured, because people love to think when someone goes through a program, like they're all fixed now.
Yeah.
And that's not how it works. Mental health is a journey, right? If you struggle with depression and anxiety, chances are it's not going to just go away. And so, but the difference for her when she came back is she had these tools. And I could see the difference in her. So it's not that she didn't have dips at different times, but she knew how to manage it. She also realized, and I think this is a really hard one for young people, is that she was the only one who could do it. And I see this with a lot of students that I talk to. They want, especially when it comes to things like medication, they think it's going to be that quick fix, and it's not. And so they feel like something is wrong with them, and they feel overwhelmed. This is going to be like, and I saw it in my own daughter, like this lifelong thing. I'm never going to be able to come out of this. Like, this is always going to feel this bad. And they can't see the future, which is why we have more and more kids attempting. When I talked to my own daughter about it, after that year, and we talked about the depression, and she said to me, and it was so profound, she said, "Mom, it used to be that when I would get into that space, I felt like I was just going into this black hole and I just couldn't come out, and I couldn't differentiate the depression from sadness. Now I can differentiate. And so if I feel that heaviness coming on, I know the things that I have to do. I know the self-care. And she does an unbelievable job at managing it. And I admire her and acknowledge it all the time, because I know it's like someone with a substance use addiction. They have to, or an eating disorder. It doesn't go away. They manage it every single day. And you look at the people who are managing it and you're like, wow, this is always something that you're having to take care of. Props to you that you keep showing up and doing this.
Did you subscribe yet? If you like our content, it's the easiest way to support the pod. Hit the subscribe button on the bottom right and keep it classy.
Yeah. I'm really trying, I would say I'm not trying to make this podcast about me, but one more personal thing I'll share that's connected to what you just said is, as I've said on this show many times, I from I think about 1920, so 6-7 years ago, was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and as you said, it doesn't there's no magic pill, right? Like, it's not like you take the meds, you go to the counseling, you come out, you're good. The darkest reality of all this is that it is a lifetime thing. You're never, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic here, but you're never fully better. It's not, it's every day. Like, what you wake up every day, you fight the battle again. But it does get easier with the right help, with the right direction, with the right purpose, with the right orientation, and sometimes with the right medication. And that's a whole nother topic that we could get into, which is, like when to use medication, when not to. Everybody has different schools of thoughts on that. But what I will say is, yes, it gets better. When you enter those places, those dark valleys, it seems like sometimes like, oh, this is not going to get better. To somebody suffering from anxiety, depression, schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, there are periods that those people go through. And having experienced myself, where it seems like there's absolutely no way this could possibly ever get better. The pandemic was, it just made things worse, so much worse for a lot of people, and just kind of this sense of hopelessness and dread. But as you said, it does get better with the right help, with the orientation. Once you give people purpose, once you give them unified network of resources, not just a bunch of disjointed, like over here, and then leaving people out to dry. But I just wanted to share that because that really resonated with me. I imagine, so you, correct me if I'm butchering the story here, but you mentioned that you had at one point send your daughter to a treatment or kind of a training program. Is that right? And that, and I'm sure that there was like times of separation and where that was very difficult. Like, for her, feeling maybe alone. I don't know these people. For you, like wondering how your daughter's doing. And I say that because, I underwent training, programs myself, went into treatment for periods of time in the past. And it was extremely difficult. You're isolated, you're in these facilities, you don't know, like, you don't know the people around you. You have to get to know everyone all over again. You feel like it's just like you're basically in this like prison or something, and that's how it feels at the beginning. But it's not. It's not true. You work your way out of that, and you get guided towards the level at which you're able to come out from that a better person, holistically. Mentally, spiritually, physically. I just kind of wanted to share that because that really resonated with me. Like the sense of like the first parts is always the hardest, right? It's like stepping into the unknown, stepping into like as the person undergoing the treatment, the training, the counseling. It's so difficult that first stage when you're just at your lowest and you're kind of forced into it, or hopefully there's not forced, but like voluntarily, but kind of pressured maybe by family and friends, and rightfully so, to undergo treatment. And it just feels like so miserable, but just knowing that there is another side of that there isn't, the other side of that, is amazing. It really is. It's like once you actually, and again, it doesn't end like completely, but when you overcome that first part and you get to the other side of your treatment, it is the best feeling ever. It really is. And then later on, when you start, having those big successes in life, like, you just remember back to where it all started from, was taking those first scary steps. So that really resonated with me. And I think honestly, a lot of people who struggle with those issues would say the same thing. But just kind of in closing, I just want to give you a kind of space to talk about, like in terms of stuff with Youthwell, maybe something that you guys have on the horizon, or something that you're trying to do in the future that you think is really going to take what you're doing now to the next level, whether it's just expanding the current outreach and community programs, whether it's integrating a certain type of treatment. Like, is there anything you can tell us about just like the bright future of this organization?
Yes, but before I do, can I just comment on something you said? Because
Go
I
ahead.
appreciate you just being so transparent about your own experience. I think for so many, that's half of it, is knowing people aren't alone in this. I think the amount of people in the entertainment industry and sports who are speaking up are making such a difference in this. And it had me thinking about just the idea of being sent there. One of my daughter and I talked a lot about this. Her perception is that she was sent away. Ours is that we put her somewhere safe. And we have talked a lot about that, because that is the feeling. If you are the person going, you feel somewhat like you're being sent away, and you're being sent somewhere to be fixed, and something's wrong with you. And that is not a good feeling.
No.
And what I wanted to comment on is how important it is for anyone, whether you're the person struggling or not, or you're the parent or the friend, to know that it's not, you have to find the right fit too. Because I've also seen people who have gone into therapy or to a treatment program or tried a medication and it doesn't work, and they think something's wrong with them. And it's like anything, there's got to be chemistry there too, right?
Yeah.
So if a therapist isn't working for you, then try something else. Don't take it all on that you are sort of stuck with this person and you have to make it work.
Yeah.
And if you're the person trying to support somebody, it is so important to be willing to listen and just sit there and be uncomfortable. Because that's the other thing I see sometimes, is that when someone's struggling with a mental health challenge, they don't know how to ask for it, what they need, because they're trying to figure it out themselves. And the people around them can get frustrated or feel like, well, they said nothing, so I'm going to just assume they need nothing. Versus, hey, just come back and keep checking in. Like, one of the things that I think is so important when you care about someone is to be able to say, hey, Steve, I feel like you're struggling. I get that you don't want to talk right now, but do you mind if I check in with you again next week? I just want you to know I see you, I hear you, I want to give you space, but I also want you to know I'm here and I'm not afraid to be in the conversation with you. Because the minute we show our discomfort or ask someone and then are afraid that they might actually answer honestly, and we start backing off, people feel, and that's part of building that trust. So I just want to share that, because I think so often people think they have to understand mental health and a mental illness. They have to have the right words. They have to know how to fix it. And the reality is most people just need you to be fully present and be willing to be uncomfortable with them while they're figuring out what they need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right that like it's important to give things a good try, but to also be willing sometimes to, maybe move to a different therapist. Maybe this training program or this treatment program for somebody isn't the best fit. It's important to acknowledge, it's really not a one size fits all. One thing, and I know we're getting away from the question I asked you, but on that note, I do want to share one more anecdote before we kind of close with that question, which is something you said is like true, that when somebody enters treatment for mental health, whether it's a specific treatment for a specific disorder or a mental health crisis, it's so profoundly impactful. Like the people they come into contact with in those centers, in those treatment centers, in those counseling programs, it really can be life or death. And to make that point, since I've already kind of opened this can of worms, like in my own story, like the last time that I was in treatment, which was within the last few years, like I went into a mental health crisis center that I didn't really know anything about. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what their approach was going to be compared to the other places that I'd been in treatment for. And actually, ironically, and I don't know how this fits in, but the thing that made the most difference for me actually wasn't even a counselor there. It wasn't somebody on staff. It was actually another patient. I was quiet, didn't say a word for 24 hours. And this individual, who I still remember to this day, walked over to me, asked how I was doing, and then handed me this note. And I looked at the note, and I still keep it on my mantelpiece to this day. And it says, It's a drawing of like a flower in bloom, just with the words underneath. It gets better, and that made all the difference to me at that moment. And it's something that like and it's hard for me not to get emotional talking about this, but at the time, at the lowest of lows, sometimes it's just that simple positive interaction that saves someone's life. That absolutely does save someone's life. And it's a lot of, and I can imagine it's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of burden for counselors, for treatment, people who work in treatment to deal with like this life or death pressure. But I think like on a positive note, kind of to spin this in a good direction, just it really can, just those little things that we do for people in life, whether it's in or outside of like a treatment program like Youthwell, like Knowing You Matter, that can save someone's life. So absolutely, just loved what you said there about just like the incredible work these people do, and it doesn't go without notice. So yeah.
Steve, can I just say something to that? Because I think there are two things. One is when we realize we can't fix another person, that's huge. And him just giving you that note, right? Like he wasn't trying to fix you. He was trying to share something with you. And as a parent, and I think a lot of parents struggle with this, I know I did, is I was constantly trying to fix everything in my daughter because I was so desperate for her to not be in this pain. But I was hurting her doing that. I needed to step back and support her and let her figure out what she needed at the same time. And one of the things I'm a big proponent of is support groups, because I think you do make those connections, whether you're the person struggling or whether you're a parent or a friend. When you go to these and you go, okay, I am not alone in this. Especially if you're a parent, to talk to other parents, to learn from them, to get tools that you can implement, it takes away the shame of it all too. Like, okay, you know what? We're doing this work together. Yeah. I remember at one point, it's going to sound terrible, but our family went to the program my daughter was in, and we had been pretty private about everything. And I think that put a lot of weight on my two other girls. And we came out, so we were all of these families in this program doing all this work, and it had been a profound day, and it was actually really incredible and bonding and the whole thing. But we get in the car, and her twin looks at all of us and goes, "We are not the most act up family in there."
Yeah.
But for her, and I share that because for her and her sister, it was like, you feel like you are the only ones going through this. You feel like, why does everybody talk about social media, right? Why does everybody else's family look so perfect and nobody else is managing this? And so you go to a group or you go to a program and you look around and you're like, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people going through stuff, and we all have to do the work. It's just different levels of how we're doing it, and it's a journey, but it does help to not feel like you're alone.
Yeah. And to anybody listening, I mean, you're not alone. I mean, like the level of the resources are out there. There's organizations like Youthwell, like Knowing You Matter, other organizations that we've talked about on this podcast. And people aren't alone. Sometimes the perception and like the situation creates that illusion. But no one's truly alone. And I really have enjoyed the opportunity to showcase like what you guys are doing, not only for your community, but just sort of how that's just not for Santa Barbara. It's also for anybody or any community that's dealing with similar issues. Like these same principles can be applied, which is why this isn't just for a particular community or a particular audience. This is for everyone. And I wish we could keep going on that note, but I do want to ask in closing, well, first of all, kind of what's coming up for you guys, anything that you want to showcase on the horizon, maybe an event or a new program or something, and then also just telling people how they can reach and access your services.
Thank you. So everything we have and everything that we do is on our website, and it's youthwell.org. Everything we do in the community and beyond is free for families. And we actually develop a lot of things that other communities can and have used. We have resource rack cards and posters that we have in a lot of our school districts now, all about just with tools and how to access resources and how do you make that call if you're struggling. So we like to make that available, and we do a lot of mental health education. To me, it is the base of everything because it is not expensive to do. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and it's a way to, again, get everybody speaking the same language. And then I would say the biggest thing I would highlight that I'm excited about that we've been doing this past year in collaboration in our community, and it's come out of the collaboration, and it's it's a very different model, but more and more is being done in our country, which is family care coordination. So we are the family care coordinators that work with families to connect them to the resources they need, but really with an out of the box approach. So it's not just you're going to go to therapy, you're going to go to a treatment program. It's like some of these kids, they just need to be tied into something. So it's like, it could be a music program. It could be a sport. It's getting the parents involved. It's really looking at the whole family and building a village around them so they feel truly supported on campus and off campus, with the idea being that if we are doing more of this early on, these kids won't have to be in crisis. These parents won't be sending their kids to treatment programs. Because what's happening now is that our systems are so impacted that all of the kids who are asking for help early are being told, I'm sorry, it sounds like you're struggling, but we have someone else who's more serious. And the message we're giving to kids when we do that is, you know what? It's not that big a deal. It's not that bad. And so
that's the wrong message.
These kids then stop asking. It's the wrong message. And then they wait till it escalates. And we have to get back to focusing on early intervention and getting people into support when they ask for it, and not 2 years later when they're in crisis or they're spending the.
I mean, and I know these 2 issues are very different, but it's sort of like, you wouldn't want to wait till cancer is like stage 4. You want to stop things in their tracks early on, and got to treat it as a medical issue, and it often is. These are often connected to real chemical disorders and imbalances and issues that are going on in people's brains. The sort of the connection between the medical and the chemical and the mental, that's a whole nother topic, but these are real life and death issues that have to be stopped early on. So unfortunately, we do have to sort of wrap it up, but I just wanted to give you a shout out one more time. So you guys are at Youthwell on Instagram, right? And other social media. It's just at Youthwell.
We're on all social media, yes, at Youthwell.
And then your website is it youthwell.org? Sorry, you already told me. Okay, youthwell.org. Okay, awesome. So check out the programs there. And one more thing is I wanted to, again, thank you for coming on today. Rachael, for telling us part of your story, sharing some personal anecdotes with us as well. And we'd love to have you on for round 2 at some point. And we're really proud to support your organization any way we can, which we'll talk about more after the episode. But thanks so much for coming on, Rachael.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. That's a wrap. This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy Podcast with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks so much for tuning in. And as always, you can find all of our content at our website at stayclassypod.com. And thanks to our production sponsor and partner, MaxLux Media. You can find them at maxluxmedia.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Every subscription helps and goes a long way towards ensuring that we can continue to produce content for viewers like yourself. Thanks so much. Stay classy.